acts of sexual violence have been done in closed interrogation rooms for so long. Acts of dehumanization, humiliation against Palestinians, they are not new. Now they are being exposed because they are doing it shamelessly. Whenever there is a confrontation between the colonized and the colonizer is ready to be brutal, aggressive, extremely violent. What the Israeli army is doing is not different than other colonial regimes.
Today we are joined with Dr Samah Jabr, a Palestinian psychiatrist and psychotherapist. She's the current chair of the Mental Health Unit at the Palestinian Ministry of Health. Dr Samah, Jazakallah khairan, thank you so much for joining us all the way from Jerusalem in Palestine. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam. Thank you very much for having me on your show.
Before we begin the podcast, a quick message from our sponsor. If you're Muslim and you care about your money, download this right now, the Halal Money app. An incredibly well-designed and easy-to-use financial app that allows you to open an account, deposit money, and spend through a Visa debit card they give you to use in your everyday transactions, away from the hands of a bank that's reveling in interest and even using your money in haram places. Download it now. Let's get back to the podcast.
It's an honor to be sitting with you and to be speaking with you in what I can imagine is a horrifying time for the entire of Palestine and the Palestinian people. It's a traumatic time. We're feeling it. Living in Australia, of course, to no degree can we compare to the suffering that the Palestinian people are experiencing themselves. So if I can start the interview, Dr. Samah Jabr, as a Palestinian person and as someone who's directly affected by this trauma, how are you feeling right now?
It's a difficult time for every Palestinian, and I think the impact of genocide does not only affect the people whose blood is at stake, but affecting the whole humanity. There are many other people who lived traumatic experiences. I think they can react and have strong reactions, strong feelings about what's taking place in Palestine. Of course, it's way more difficult for Palestinians. I come from Jerusalem. I work in the West Bank. I used to work in Gaza. I know the streets, the people of Gaza, and what's happening there is horrifying. It's more horrifying that it has been taking place for more than 10 months, and the world has not managed to stop it so far. And it is televised. Everyone knows about what's taking place in Gaza. Everyone who wants to know what's taking place, they can just open their screens and watch live bombardment, deliberate starvation of the people, the huge attack on the health sector. So it is very painful and to watch what's going on in the West Bank and Jerusalem. People fear a repetition of similar circumstances if they manage to do that in Gaza and the world failed to stop them. Why wouldn't they repeat the same thing in the West Bank or in Jerusalem? So it's a very difficult time of fear and, to a certain level, disappointment and abandonment.
Subhanallah, Dr. Samah, there is no way we can ever imagine the pain, the suffering that you and the Palestinian people collectively are experiencing in this current moment. But I do believe you are a frontline worker, someone who is involved in giving healing or attempting to heal the wounds that many of the Palestinian people are facing, as you mentioned, in the West Bank, in Jerusalem, and in Gaza itself. If you can, for our viewers at home, illustrate to them what a typical day would look like in your shoes as a psychotherapist and a psychiatrist in Palestine.
You know, in my role as the director of the Mental Health Unit at the Ministry of Health, we don't only treat individuals who are affected in the West Bank and Jerusalem, but I'm also involved in policy planning, trying to provide a national mental health response in reaction to the situation that is taking place. So I meet with many other stakeholders in mental health, NGOs working in the field, and we negotiate an appropriate response to the situation in Gaza. It is very frustrating because there is very little that we can do when the bombardment has not stopped and it is continuing, with no safe place, with no basic needs of food, medication. When people cannot be reassured about their physical safety, it's very difficult to talk about an appropriate mental health response. And we have our own challenges in the West Bank. Also in the West Bank, there is a lot of killing, a lot of detention, a lot of torture that is taking place, which overwhelms the health system and the mental health system. And maybe it is less known to the people outside Palestine, but also I work in the public sector, and public health employees have not been receiving their salaries. There is an economic crisis in the West Bank, and which renders our work very difficult. There are employees who cannot come to work, and there are checkpoints at every town and village, which renders our movement from one place to another very difficult and very expensive, and that gives the excuse to some people not to arrive to work. So our work capacity has decreased when the need is becoming much more important and significant. And all of that is a big load on the health sector in general and the mental health system. I just want to say that cases of grief, people grieving for the lost ones, in the West Bank, but you can imagine a much bigger scale in Gaza. Grief reaction and torture and consequences of political detention are very, very common. And I think that the best way to meet the need of these people is not within the classic mental health services, but to create a community approach that reaches out to these people and try to help them where they are.
Jazakallah khairan for that, Dr. Samah. Again, it's very hard to just imagine. You've illustrated for us the strain that currently is on the mental health sector to try to deliver healing to the people that are suffering. Dr. Samah, if I could share with you, just today during Salat al-Jumu'ah, we had our Friday prayers, and I was approached by a man who said he had just escaped from Gaza, and he had just recently come to Australia, and he began to describe to me the horrors that he had experienced, that he had escaped from. He began to describe to me the fact that all of his homes were destroyed in Gaza. And every time he would try to explain another incident that happened to him, he was on the cusp of tears. He was constantly in and out of breaking down while he was describing the trauma. And for me, I didn't know how to respond to this. And I could not imagine what he has went through. But at the same time, I couldn't help but feel that this man was one of the lucky ones who came to Australia, despite the horrors that he had seen before. And as hard as it is to say that he was one of the lucky ones, where do you begin in addressing some of this trauma?
Well, it's very difficult. We understand very well that the psychological trauma would stay much longer than the physical trauma to our bodies. Actually, it is surprising because sometimes people, when their physical health is at risk, they don't have the time to get in touch with their feelings. They are just in a mode of survival, and they wouldn't have sufficient time to reprocess their psychological reactions. And the psychological complaints and suffering starts when people are usually reassured about their physical health. So we imagine that the complaints will be much higher in the future. And we know that this kind of trauma will pass from one generation to another. It will not affect only Gazans, but all of those who are concerned, who are in touch, who are in connection and relation to people in Gaza, their family members, their compatriots, and many other people who lived past traumatic events, and their trauma is being stirred up, their re-traumatic experiences are being provoked by the images that they see in Gaza. Where do we begin? I think ceasefire is necessary to start working in Gaza. Now we are working with the population of Jerusalem and the West Bank. And I even am consulted by some Palestinians in diaspora who are affected by what they watch on TV that is happening in Gaza. But I think in Gaza, we now what is all the work that's being done is relief work, trying to meet the basic needs, and that is not sufficient. So ceasefire is mandatory. What do we do in the meanwhile? Advocacy, awareness, trying to meet the basic needs, trying to mobilize mental health professionals and health professionals to amplify the voices of their Palestinian colleagues who call for ending the bombardment, ending the genocide. That's a priority. And then we can start responding to the atrocity and the impact on the mental health of people. I want to remind you also that Gaza has been in a serious crisis, health crisis and mental health crisis even before genocide. Poverty was above 50%, unemployment above 50%, food insecurity was above 60%. A 15-year-old child has lived 4 wars, and the atrocities and the violence that were used against the people who joined the Grand March of Return. So violence is commonplace even before this genocide, but it is obvious that at this time the level of atrocity is beyond imagination, and the impact is going way beyond Gaza. I see in the West Bank people who suffer deeply because of what they are watching in Gaza. I meet young mothers, pregnant mothers or postpartum mothers who feel guilty about bringing children to this very dangerous and unsafe world. I meet young people who stopped eating or who hoard food in anticipation that genocidal atrocities will be committed against Palestinians in the West Bank. So they stop eating. They develop a disordered eating. I wouldn't say it's an eating disorder because it doesn't have the component of a body image problem. It's a problem about food security and weaponized starvation. So the level of suffering is very huge, and it requires political action more than before, I would say, a psychiatric response or a mental health response to atrocity.
SubhanAllah, it really goes to show where our priorities should be in this current time as we speak. Dr. Samah, there is something I wanted to draw your attention to. Here in Australia and the West, we have been inundated with videos and visuals coming out of Gaza of incredible signs of resilience amongst the people of Palestine. You know, they're very inspiring scenes of determination, resilience. And these have been very, very inspiring scenes that have really, you know, hit the heart of so many living abroad in the West. Yet I imagine this is only half the picture. these incredible signs of resilience, I'm sure they should not undermine the incredible pain, the incredible suffering, perhaps the helplessness that the people of Gaza are currently experiencing. How are they balancing this feeling of helplessness while at the same time trying to remain resilient, in your opinion?
Two things. I want to say first that this is not only psychological resilience, this is the
Mhm.
Palestinian sumud, which
Yes.
is a concept that is more complex than just psychological resilience. It involves also political action. It's not only the mindset reaction, the psychological reaction, but it is the psychological state of being, plus it is action oriented. So they try to be patient with the situation, try to encourage themselves and each other to stand up to the difficult time, and at the same time express that in action, which is usually political action or pro-social action, action of perseverance and steadfastness. And I would say that we know in general in a traumatic situation, many people get affected, but there are some people who are energized and who develop post-traumatic growth, adversity, advanced development in reaction to trauma. This is the case for Palestinians. We have seen journalists and medical doctors who work beyond their usual human capacity in order to respond to the atrocity. They get energized, they feel their responsibility and the importance of their action, and they try to do their best. Many ordinary people who don't have a profession also, they try to be helpful to other people in their community. We see some people who worked as teachers in the past. They take children in the tents around them and sit with them and try to teach them. We see a grandma who's during winter she was sewing clothes, warm clothes, for children who are cold because they don't have clothes, because they left everything behind when they had to be displaced from one place to another. So that is an integral part of the Palestinian culture, of the Muslim culture, and it is part of the political action that is within the hands of each and every Palestinian to show their perseverance, their steadfastness, to get more grounded to the Palestinian culture, to the Palestinian land, to the Palestinian community, when they feel the threat of uprootment, of when the political power and the violence means to uproot them, they try to act in a way that makes them more grounded in the community and more grounded in the Palestinian land and more grounded in the Palestinian culture.
SubhanAllah. It's a resilience which is incredibly inspiring, and as I mentioned, SubhanAllah, it's reached Australia, it's reached abroad, it's inspired millions across the Western world, and I would even argue non-Muslims as well. Dr. Samah, you did, yes?
If I may add that acts of sumud / resilience do not mean that these people are not wounded. They
Yes.
are wounded, but they are not forced into helplessness in reaction to their wounds and to their agony. They are wounded, they suffer psychologically, but there is still a healthy part that they try to nurture in themselves in reaction to atrocity and agony.
Definitely. It's not to undermine the pain that they are experiencing. Dr. Samah, you did touch on something earlier. I want to draw your attention to the fact that Western approaches to psychiatry or psychotherapy are ineffective, and that there needs to be a more cultural psychological response, if I'm correct in saying this. Yes? If I could just add to that, what role does the religion of the Palestinian people, which is predominantly Islam, play in regards to this as well?
Well, there's a lot to say about what is culturally appropriate for the Palestinian people in the field of mental health and in their therapy. First, Palestinians who suffer from genocide and political violence, they consider themselves to be wounded, not to be sick. And this wounding and this injury requires a healing process. And healing processes are usually organic. The mental health professionals can be facilitator for these organic processes. This wound, this injury is collective. It can be best treated in a collective setting. We cannot imagine that we put every Palestinian on therapy chair to deal with their experiences, but people create their own healing circles, their own listening groups, their own support groups for certain professions, medical doctors, health professionals, rescue teams, journalists, so that they can process what happened to them. They can support each other. Every one of them can be a wounded and a healer at the same time. So that's the approach that is most suitable for Palestinians. In Palestine, we acknowledge that we cannot talk about psychology and mental health while avoiding the political question. We cannot be depoliticized. We cannot depoliticize health and mental health in Palestine, because we know that this agony and this suffering and this pain was brought by political will and by a military violence. So we need to address that. We need to speak about it. We need to protest against it. This is part of the healing process that is important for individuals, but also this is part of the role of mental health professionals. And of course, the Palestinian culture is full of valuable meanings that give purpose to people, that help people generate a better meaning of their experience. It is very much influenced by Islamic values like patience, takaful, tarahum, compassion. Even the word sumud, this is one of the description of God, Samad, in Surah Al-Ikhlas. And this is, sumud means relying on the Samad, the only Samad, relying on God as the ultimate protector and ultimate refuge for those who suffer. The word is used by every Palestinian, whether they come from Islamic faith, they are Christians, they're secular, they're atheists. It became integrated in the Palestinian political culture. So, yeah, I think the Palestinian culture is full of things that we can rely on to face our atrocities. We have learned from 1 century of suffering and confrontation with arbitrary political violence. And with that learning, we find many things that help us to face this huge atrocity.
Subhanallah. Dr. Samah, before we move on into the political violence, I would like to just draw from any experiences you may have throughout your decades of working with the Palestinian people that really speak to you when it comes to witnessing this resilience amongst the Palestinian people. Do you have any personal experiences you would love to share with us?
Well,
I'm sure you've seen many.
Of course. I see many people who suffer, but nevertheless, they try to be inspiring for others. People go through a lot of pain and they resist despair and helplessness. I see in my work children who were supported by their mothers at the beginning. And when the mothers got tired and started showing signs of despair, we hear the children trying to support their mothers. I see victims of torture who, after experiencing horrible atrocities, they came out of prison and they started taking action and expressing their desire to be helpful agents in the society, helpful individuals. We see in Gaza doctors coming out of horrible experiences, horrible torture, and 2-3 days after coming out of prison, they go back to hospitals to help others. So it's experience in Palestine is very rich, and we see everything. We see severe suffering and inspiring examples of steadfastness and perseverance.
SubhanAllah, that's incredible to hear from you, Dr. Samah. On the topic of political violence, I'm sure you have worked, very closely with the Palestinian people. But as an expert in the realm of mental health and psychiatry, if I can ask you a question on the psychology of Israeli soldiers. I know you don't work with them, alhamdulillah, but for instance, there are many psychological studies that try to unravel and uncover how the troops of Nazi Germany were able to partake in acts of extermination. And they try to, get to the bottom of, how can an ordinary citizen become so evil and so willing to partake in acts of genocide? When it comes to the Israeli soldiers themselves, who are currently on trial for genocide and have currently been labeled by the United Nations as those guilty of inflicting extermination, what is the psychological understanding of how people can stoop so low to partake in a genocide?
Listen, I'm not an expert on this topic, but I will attempt to answer you.
Okay.
I have my opinion about it. First, I want to say that in Israel, everyone is implicated, not only soldiers. Every Israeli, they are supposedly portrayed as the only democracy in the Middle East.
Mm-hmm.
They vote for their government. They are beneficiaries of colonial privileges. Every Israeli is a beneficiary of colonial privileges. And most of Israelis are soldiers, whether they are active soldiers or soldiers in reserve. Almost every Israeli, except for the religious ultra-Orthodox, they took part at a certain time of their life in serving in the West Bank, in Gaza, in Jerusalem. So that's a special situation. I don't think there is any other country who is militarized like Israel. And that makes the moral responsibility not only that makes a situation where every Israeli takes moral responsibility for the acts of the military, not only soldiers in the military. And at the same time, I think that what the Israeli army is doing is not different than other colonial regimes. I think whenever there is a confrontation between the colonized and the colonizer is ready to be brutal, aggressive, extremely violent. And moments of confrontation reveal the racism, the dehumanization that they harbor towards the colonized. And I think what the world has been watching since the beginning of genocide, since October 23, is not something unknown to Palestinians. It was known to us when Israel was perceived by the world as the only democracy in the Middle East, as the country who exports computer chips and genetically modified vegetables to the world. But now this confrontation makes the world sees the true face of Israel as any other colonial regime that was capable of committing horrible atrocities. The exceptional thing about Israel is that the fact that Israel has enjoyed for so long international support, impunity. It has never paid the price for its horrible crimes against Palestinians. UN resolutions were not forced on Israel. So that's the exceptional thing about Israel. And when absolute power corrupts absolutely. So Israel is very corrupted now, and this confrontation between Palestinians and Israel is exposing that corruption and this hubris sensation, this sense of entitlement that Israel has, and that legitimizes or it allows all the crimes that they are doing against Palestinians.
SubhanAllah. We're also witnessing, I think, forgive me for bringing this up, but there's a very perverse side towards the attacks of Israel in Gaza and in terms of their acts of warfare. So, for instance, we're sometimes seeing them rummaging through the bedrooms of people of Gaza. We're seeing them commit sexual violence against even prisoners, male prisoners. So this is a very traumatic attack that the people of the Israeli soldiers are inflicting. How much of Israel's war right now is a psychological warfare, would you say?
What you're seeing now, and it's shocking to you, is not new. This is something that we knew. I've been working with the victims of torture for almost 20 years now. And we know these stories. The new thing is about the shamelessness.
Yes.
About this. They are doing it in front of cameras, and they are doing it more frequently. There are more soldiers engaging in this. But acts of sexual violence have been done in closed interrogation rooms for so long. Acts of dehumanization, humiliation against Palestinians, they are not new. Now they are being exposed because they are doing it shamelessly. So that's my observation.
As much as it is a war of, carnage and actively killing people, they're actually also psychologically traumatizing them in the process as well.
Well, I think they are using way more effective. They are using methods that are way more effective against Palestinians than the psychological war. They are using massive bombardment. The amount of bombs that fell on Gaza is 7 times more than the amount of bombs that fell on Hiroshima. And the surface area of Gaza is 1/3 of that of Hiroshima. They are using weaponized starvation. In 2024, there is weaponized starvation that the world did not manage to stop. They are destroying completely the health system. The psychological war, I think they need it. They need to do it in order to compensate for their sense of humiliation that comes from what happened on October the 7th. In a very childish and ineffective way, in a very primitive, I would say, not childish, very primitive and ineffective way, they are trying to exaggerate in humiliating Palestinians and creating images and photos that they are distributing among themselves on WhatsApp groups for soldiers in order to compensate for the images of the defeat of the Israeli army in the surrounding of Gaza on October the 7th. I think they can be a little bit discreet against Palestinians, but they are doing this. I don't think that the psychological war against Palestinians is the most effective tool that they are using, because they are using ways that are more brutal. They need to distribute these images to in a futile attempt to correct the image that was broken on October the 7th.
Yes, Jazakallah khair for that, Dr. Samah. On top of that, or following from that, we've also seen that the way that the Israeli army operates, they target, for instance, medical facilities, infrastructure, which is important for the continuation of the Palestinian people. They will target hospitals, schools, medical professionals, journalists are a common target as well. On saying this, Dr. Samah, do you fear, given your role on the front line, that you are also a target of the Israeli occupation? And do you fear being in that position?
I have the illusion that I'm not. But we know that other health professionals in Gaza who are facing the direct attack, of course, they were targeted. The hundreds of them were arrested and tortured. They were tortured in a more brutal way than the general population. All Gaza hospitals were partially damaged or completely destroyed. Many health staff were targeted and killed, over 500 of them. So there is no doubt that the health system is targeted, health personnel are targeted to inflict more death and pain on Palestinians, so that if there will be an end of bombardment tomorrow, Palestinians will continue dying. There will be ongoing death for those who were left with untreated chronic diseases and other preventable diseases. People were dying out of respiratory tract infections in Gaza. So damaging the health system is one of the effective tools of genocide and inflicting more pain. 3 experts in The Lancet published earlier this month. They published that the real estimation of death in Gaza exceeds 186,000 people. It's not the 40,000 who were killed by bombardment. They estimate that more people were killed due to chronic diseases and starvation and untreated wounds. So, yeah, I think health professionals can be targeted, are being targeted as a way to inflict more pain, and also in revenge, because the health professionals demonstrated post-traumatic growth, sumud, adversity, advanced development. They are role models. They are highly esteemed by the Palestinian population. So to treat them in this way, to humiliate them when they were tortured, there are certain accounts, I cannot even talk about them in order not to shock the audience, but some accounts of things that happen to health professionals are shocking. And they inflicted so much humiliation on them to change their status, to kill them, to assassinate them psychologically, so that if they go back and survive the killing, they will live as shadows of human beings, broken human beings, and they will not inspire people and be role models anymore.
SubhanAllah, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make it easy. It's incredibly difficult to understand that the Israeli occupation is targeting the mental health sector particularly or specifically, and that is something which is gravely concerning for all of us. Dr. Samah, I wanted to hone in onto Western audiences right now. As you mentioned previously at the beginning of the podcast, there are those living abroad, whether they are from the Palestinian diaspora or even those who are concerned, and a lot of us are concerned. Of course, you only have to be human to be concerned about the suffering in Palestine. And to be concerned means you are going to be suffering a degree of vicarious trauma. You are going to experience trauma. You will have trouble sleeping at night. You'll have trouble eating out at restaurants. You'll have trouble going about your everyday. What advice would you give to us living abroad who are suffering to a such smaller degree, to a insignificant degree compared to the Palestinian suffering? I feel, uneasy even mentioning this suffering in front of a Palestinian who's living on the forefront. But what advice would you give to those abroad?
I think the remedy for vicarious trauma is action, political action and solidarity. Unrelentless, not only to achieve ceasefire, but to achieve the liberation of Palestine, ending the occupation of Palestine. It has been going on for so long. 1 century is enough. International solidarity is very important. It protects your humanity. It protects you from vicarious trauma. It connects you with Palestinians and eases the pain of Palestinian individuals. And it connects us in a common humanity. It protects the social fabric, the social contract of the Palestinians in making them part of a larger humanity. I think we should nurture and strengthen international solidarity with the Palestinian cause and create an ending the occupation movement, a global movement that strives for ending the occupation of Palestine.
Jazakallah khairan for that, Dr. Samah. I'm sure that would give us a sense of purpose, a sense of fulfillment as we navigate these trying times. Lastly, you have mentioned, we should try to see justice during our time by, being involved in activism, trying our best to advocate for the Palestinian cause. But there comes a time when you do feel helpless and you do feel like your efforts are going to no avail. And despite how hard we are trying, the Israeli occupation has the upper hand. Being fed by America, the superpower of the world, we feel like we are helpless. And no matter what we do, we will never eventuate into a free Palestine. On saying this, this is a strong feeling of helplessness. What is the ultimate remedy for this? Even if we do put in the effort, we do put in all the work, but we just don't see something eventuate. Is there something we can tap into a lot deeper?
There is something from Islamic philosophy,
yes,
Islamic literature, that helps us deal with this predicament. I think that our obligation is to try and to work for a purpose, not to achieve the purpose necessarily. We say in Arabic, على الإنسان السعي وليس بلوغ المنال. Our obligation is to try and make efforts in the direction of achieving a certain goal, not necessarily to achieve that goal. Mm-hmm. So we get satisfaction from the journey. Yes. We get satisfaction from trying, from knowing that we are trying to walk in the right path, even if we don't achieve the final goal. It is very dangerous to judge our actions by the end goal, because this will be very frustrating and this will make people turn away from the right paths if they don't achieve the right goal. Another thing that comes from Islamic philosophy is that what a Muslim person is in the search of meaning and purpose, not in the search of happiness. If happiness comes as a byproduct when we are after meaning and purpose, then this is great. And happiness is seen as a byproduct of searching for a meaning and purpose. So I think that this philosophy is an essential part of the thinking of Palestinians. And I mean, even the Palestinians who are not necessarily Muslims or faithful Muslims, even secular and atheist Palestinians, experience have taught us the depth and the profoundness of these meanings. And I think we live our life by these meanings. And this helps us to not lose hope and not be forced into helplessness.
SubhanAllah. Jazakallahu khairan for that, Dr. Samah. I feel like it's a battle that we cannot give up on. Given everything that has been said, it's a battle that we cannot stop fighting. So Jazakallahu khairan for that. If you do have any final words for our viewers, please feel free to share them, inshallah.
I just want to emphasize how important international solidarity is for Palestinians. We export to you our sumud. You give us international solidarity. Like that, we will maintain our social fabric, our human fabric, in spite of all the tyranny and all the violence and injustice in the world.
Jazakallahu khairan for that. Those were beautiful words for us to end on this podcast. It's been a phenomenal conversation. It's been an enlightening conversation. It's a very difficult and painful conversation as well. But Jazakallahu khairan, Dr. Samah. It's been an honor to have you with us on the podcast. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to aid, to assist, and to grant victory to our brothers and sisters that are suffering in Palestine, and to allow us all to witness a free Palestine in our life, inshallah, from the river to the sea. Bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. And thank you so much once again.
Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.